Chapter 13. The Mission to Take Down Gato. The evening sun cast a warm, orange glow across Tazuna's small dining room, but the mood around the table was far from tranquil. Team 10 sat quietly, their minds preoccupied with the mission ahead, while Tazuna and Tsunami moved about, setting down dishes for dinner. The room was filled with a tense, uneasy silence, broken only by the clinking of plates and the occasional creak of wooden chairs. Suddenly, Inari, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, could no longer contain himself. He stood up, his small fists clenched, his face flushed with frustration. "How can all of you just sit here and talk like nothing's wrong?" he yelled, his voice cracking with the intensity of his emotions. "You're all going to die. Gato is going to kill you, and you're just sitting here." The outburst caught everyone's attention, and they all turned to look at him. The tension in the room thickened, the weight of Inari's words settling over them. For a moment, no one spoke, as if waiting for someone to break the silence. Finally, Shikamaru, who had been leaning back in his chair, arms crossed and eyes half closed, raised an eyebrow at the boy. "What makes you think we're going to die?" he asked, his tone calm, almost nonchalant, as if the thought hadn't even crossed his mind. "We're shinobi. This is what we do." Inari's eyes were wide, a mix of fear and desperation clouding his gaze. "Because you don't understand. Gato is too strong. He has too many men, too much power, and we're just normal people. How can you be so calm when you're all going to get yourselves killed?" His voice broke on the last word, his fear palpable, making the adults in the room exchange uneasy glances. Asuma, who had been quietly observing the scene, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He regarded Inari with a steady, reassuring gaze, waiting until the boy's breathing began to slow. "Listen, Inari," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to worry about Gato. We've handled situations like this before. And besides, both Zabuza and his accomplice are out of the picture." Inari frowned, confusion replacing some of the fear in his eyes. "But how do you know that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know they won't come back?" Shikamaru, who had been listening intently, turned his gaze to Asuma, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, how do we know that Zabuza's accomplice is out of the picture?" he echoed, curiosity lacing his tone. "We only dealt with Zabuza himself." Asuma's eyes shifted to Naruto for a brief moment before returning to Shikamaru and the rest of the group. "Because Naruto defeated them yesterday," he said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact, as if he were simply stating the weather. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, slowly, the others turned to look at Naruto, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Shikamaru's mouth fell open slightly, his usual lazy expression replaced by one of genuine surprise. Hinata's eyes widened, her gaze darting between Naruto and Asuma, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. "Wait, what?" Shikamaru finally said, his tone incredulous. "Naruto, you fought Zabuza's accomplice? How? When?" Hinata's voice was softer, almost hesitant. "Naruto-kun, is that true? What happened?" Naruto, who had been sitting quietly, staring at his hands, finally looked up. His expression was blank, his eyes cold and distant. "Yeah," he said simply, his tone flat, offering no explanation, no elaboration. "I fought them. It's done." The bluntness of his response left the room in another uneasy silence. Shikamaru's brow furrowed, his mind working to piece together the implications of Naruto's words. "But how did you—" Before Shikamaru could finish his question, Asuma cut him off, his tone calm, but carrying a note of authority that silenced any further inquiries. "That's enough for now," he said, glancing around the table. "We've got more important things to focus on right now. Tomorrow, we're taking Gato down, and I need all of you to be prepared for what's coming." Inari's eyes were still wide, a flicker of hope mixing with his lingering fear. "But how are you going to do that? Gato has guards, and there are so many of them." Asuma's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "With Zabuza and his accomplice out of the picture, Gato doesn't have his main source of protection anymore," he explained. "That makes him vulnerable, and we're going to use that to our advantage. Tomorrow, we're launching an infiltration mission at Gato's secret hideout on the edge of the village. We'll strike fast, hit hard, and make sure he doesn't get the chance to regroup or escape. Hinata's gaze sharpened, a determined light in her eyes. "I'll do my best to help," she said quietly, her voice steady with resolve. "We can't let Gato hurt anyone else." Shikamaru, who had regained some of his composure, nodded thoughtfully. "All right," he said, his tone serious. "But what's the plan?" "We'll split into 2 groups, Asuma explained, leaning forward, his eyes scanning each of them as he spoke. "One group will handle the guards and create a distraction, while the other goes straight for Gato. Our objective is to capture him alive and turn him over to the local authorities. We need to be quick and efficient, no loose ends." Naruto, who had been silent throughout most of the conversation, finally spoke, his voice low and detached. "Fine," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "Let's just get it over with." Shikamaru glanced at Naruto, noting the coldness in his voice, but chose not to press him further. Instead, he nodded, his mind already running through the possible scenarios they might face. "Got it. Just make sure none of the guards get a chance to raise an alarm." Asuma stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. "That's the plan. Get some rest tonight. We move out at dawn, and we're going to finish this once and for all." Inari looked around at the group, still unsure but seeing the determination in their eyes. He wanted to believe them, but a part of him was still afraid. You really think you can do it?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Asuma nodded, his expression confident. "We're shinobi. We've trained for this. You'll see, Inari. Gato won't be a problem for much longer." The team dispersed shortly after, each of them retreating to their own rooms, but the weight of the upcoming mission hung heavy in the air. Tomorrow, everything would come to a head, and they would either succeed or face the consequences of failure. But for now, all they could do was prepare themselves for what lay ahead. The night air was cool and still, the quiet hum of the village drowned out by the distant rush of the river and the faint creaking of the unfinished bridge. Gato's hideout loomed at the edge of the village, a squat, nondescript building that seemed to blend into the surrounding shadows. Inside, Gato sat behind his desk, a smug grin on his face as he sipped from a small, ornate cup. To him, everything was under control. The bridge project was still faltering, the villagers still feared him, and he had nothing to worry about. He had seen to it that Zabuza's failure wouldn't be repeated. Leaning back, he glanced at the 2 guards stationed by the door, their expressions dull and uninterested. They had been doing this for weeks now, watching over Gato as he conducted his shady deals, and nothing had ever happened to threaten his position. It was just another night, like all the others. Another night where they could sit back, relax, and get paid. One of the guards yawned, glancing out of the window at the empty street outside. "Another quiet night," he muttered, scratching his head. "Wonder why the boss is so worried all the time." The other guard shrugged, his gaze fixed on the corridor that led to Gato's office. "He's paranoid, that's why," he said, a bored look on his face. "Ever since those shinobi showed up, he's been jumpy. But we've got the place locked down. Nothing's getting in." But as the words left his mouth, something moved at the edge of the guard's vision, a flicker of shadow that made him pause. He blinked, squinting into the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the faint rustle of the wind outside, the whisper of leaves brushing against the walls. Gato, oblivious to the subtle tension growing around him, chuckled to himself, already thinking about how he would deal with the villagers once his hold was even tighter. He was about to pour himself another drink when, without warning, the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. Before he could even register what had happened, a blur of movement filled the room, and the guards at the door were yanked back, silenced before they could draw their weapons. The first guard didn't even have time to gasp before a swift, silent blow to the back of his head sent him crumpling to the ground. The other turned, eyes wide with shock, his hand reaching for his sword, but a shadowy figure appeared beside him, and a glint of metal was the last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him whole. Gato's eyes widened as he took in the scene, his heart lurching in his chest. One moment, he had been sipping his drink, enjoying the quiet, and the next, his guards were down, their bodies limp on the floor. Panic surged through him, and he scrambled to stand, his hands shaking as he reached for the drawer where he kept a concealed knife. But he never got the chance to grab it. A cold, firm hand clamped down on his shoulder, forcing him back into his chair. Gato's eyes darted up, and he found himself staring into the calm, steely gaze of Asuma, who had appeared behind him without a sound. Gato tried to speak, to shout, to call for help, but his voice caught in his throat, strangled by the sheer terror that gripped him. "You're not going anywhere, Gato," Asuma said, his tone as cool and controlled as his grip. "It's over." Gato's mind raced, frantically searching for a way out. But before he could even form a coherent thought, there was a flicker of movement from the shadows, and Shikamaru, Hinata, and Naruto stepped into the room, their expressions calm, focused. Each of them had their own task, and they executed it with the precision of seasoned shinobi. Hinata's Byakugan had already mapped out the building, pinpointing the guards' positions, while Shikamaru's shadow manipulation ensured that any resistance was swiftly and silently dealt with. Outside, a bandit who had been patrolling the perimeter suddenly felt something cold brush against his leg. He looked down, confused, and saw a dark shadow creeping toward him, slithering across the ground like a serpent. Before he could react, the shadow coiled around his ankles, yanking him off his feet and dragging him into the darkness. He tried to scream, but a hand clamped over his mouth, and the world went black. Inside the hideout, the remaining guards rushed to the corridor, alerted by the sudden noise, but they were met with the same swift, coordinated assault. Asuma and his team moved through the building like ghosts, slipping in and out of the shadows, incapacitating each guard before they even realized what was happening. There were no shouts, no cries, just the soft thud of bodies hitting the floor, one after another. Gato's hands shook as he realized the extent of his mistake. He had underestimated them, underestimated the shinobi who had slipped into his stronghold without so much as a whisper. And now they were here, surrounding him, closing in. Asuma released his grip on Gato's shoulder, stepping back to allow the others to form a perimeter around the room. Gato looked up, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Wait, we can talk about this," he stammered, his voice high and panicked. I can pay you. Whatever you want, I'll double it, triple it." Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained silent, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Shikamaru let out a sigh, his tone flat. "You really don't get it, do you? There's no deal you can make. It's over." Gato's desperation grew, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. But there was none. His empire, his power, it was all crumbling before his eyes, and he was powerless to stop it. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice breaking. I'm Gato. I control everything here. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Asuma's eyes hardened, and he stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Gato. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "We don't know everything about you, but we do know this. You're done." Before Gato could utter another word, Asuma's fist lashed out, striking him squarely in the temple. The blow was swift, precise, and it sent Gato sprawling, unconscious, onto the floor. The room fell silent, the tension dissipating in an instant, replaced by a calm, resolute stillness. The mission was over. Outside the hideout, the last of Gato's bandits were quickly subdued, their attempts to flee thwarted by the shinobi who moved through the darkness like shadows. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, the area was secure, and the once mighty Gato had been reduced to a prisoner, bound and helpless, surrounded by the very people he had sought to control. As the team regrouped, Asuma glanced at each of them, a small, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Good work," he said, his tone warm with approval. "We did what we came to do. Now let's get him out of here and back to the authorities." They moved efficiently, securing Gato and leading him out of the hideout, the first light of dawn casting long shadows across the village. As the sun began to rise over the village, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape, Inari stood near the outskirts, watching the group of shinobi emerge from the shadows of Gato's hideout. His heart pounded in his chest, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. He had seen them move through the darkness, swift and silent, dismantling Gato's operation with an efficiency that left him breathless. It was like watching a storm sweep across the land, unstoppable, powerful, and precise. For so long, Inari had believed that there was no hope, that Gato was too strong, that nothing could change the way things were. But now, as he saw the shinobi leading Gato out, bound and unconscious, he felt something stir inside him, a spark of hope that he hadn't felt in years. He took a few hesitant steps forward, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. The fear that had always been there, the fear that had kept him from believing, was still present, but now it was mixed with something else, something stronger. Inari's eyes followed Asuma, who was walking at the head of the group, his expression calm and composed, as if this victory was nothing more than another day's work. Then his gaze shifted to Shikamaru, Hinata, and Naruto, and he felt a lump form in his throat. These were the same people he had seen laughing and chatting around the table the night before, and now they had done something incredible, something he'd never thought possible. As the group approached, Inari's voice found him before his courage did. "Wait," he called out, his voice trembling slightly but loud enough to be heard. I need to say something?" Asuma stopped, turning to face Inari with a gentle, questioning look. "What is it, kid?" Inari took a deep breath, his heart hammering in his chest. I thought you guys couldn't do it. I thought there was no way anyone could beat Gato," he said, his words rushing out, stumbling over themselves. "But you did it. You really did it. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I said those things last night. I was scared, and I didn't believe in you, but you showed me I was wrong." He lowered his head, his cheeks burning with a mix of shame and admiration. I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up, even when it seemed like you didn't have a reason to fight for us." Asuma's gaze softened, and he crouched down to meet Inari's eye level. "Hey, there's no need to apologize," he said, his tone kind. "Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What matters is what you do after that fear. And you found the courage to speak your mind. That's not easy." Inari's eyes glistened as he looked up, surprised by Asuma's words. "But I didn't do anything," he said, his voice small. "You're the ones who saved the village." Asuma's smile was gentle, his gaze unwavering. "Sometimes, finding hope is the hardest part, and you've already done that. The rest will come with time." Shikamaru, who had been watching the exchange quietly, chimed in, his tone unusually light. "Yeah, don't beat yourself up, kid. It's not like we came here expecting a warm welcome. We just did what needed to be done." Hinata stepped forward, offering Inari a shy, encouraging smile. "I'm glad that we could help," she said softly. "You were very brave to speak up, Inari." Inari's heart swelled at their words, and he found himself smiling despite the tears threatening to spill over. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thank you so much." Naruto, who had been standing silently at the back of the group, finally spoke, his tone quiet and steady. "Just keep moving forward," he said, his eyes meeting Inari's. "Don't let fear decide what you can and can't do." It was a simple statement, but there was a weight to it, a depth that made Inari's heart clench. He didn't fully understand the meaning behind Naruto's words, but he could sense the sincerity, the quiet strength that lay beneath them, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The team gave Inari one last nod before turning to head back to Tazuna's home, their mission complete. But as they walked, the mood was different, lighter. The shadows that had loomed over the village for so long seemed to lift, replaced by the first hints of dawn. The path back to Konoha was long, but the air was filled with a sense of relief and accomplishment. The team had completed their first mission outside the village, and though it hadn't gone as planned, they had managed to turn things around. Still, as they made their way home, each member was lost in their own thoughts, processing everything that had happened. Asuma walked at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon, but his mind elsewhere. The mission was over, but he knew that his responsibilities were far from complete. The incident with Naruto, the strange red chakra that had surged from him during the fight with Haku, these were things he couldn't ignore. He knew that it was the Nine-Tails chakra, sealed within Naruto, but what worried him was how little control Naruto seemed to have over it, and how the boy was handling the revelation that such a force was even inside him. Asuma's thoughts darkened as he considered the potential consequences. He's got power, but without control, and now he knows what that power is, Asuma thought, a sense of unease creeping into his chest. I need to talk to my father about this. Naruto's going through more than he's letting on, and this isn't something he should handle alone. Shikamaru, walking a few steps behind Asuma, let out a quiet sigh, his hands tucked into his pockets. Well, that was a mess, he thought, his usual laziness replaced by a rare seriousness. He was glad it was over, glad they had managed to pull it off. But there was something that kept nagging at him. The way Asuma had talked about Naruto's fight, the way he had avoided certain details. It was like there was something he didn't want them to know. Shikamaru's eyes flicked to Naruto, who was walking at the back of the group, his expression unreadable. What happened out there, he wondered, his mind already trying to piece together the puzzle. And why isn't Asuma telling us everything? Hinata, meanwhile, walked with a slight spring in her step, her heart light with a sense of accomplishment. She had always been unsure of herself, always doubting her abilities, but today she had proven to herself that she could be strong, that she could make a difference. The village had been saved, and she had played a part in that. We did it, she thought, a soft smile tugging at her lips. We really did it. But as she glanced at Naruto, her smile faltered slightly. She could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes were fixed ahead, distant and unfocused. Naruto-kun, she thought, concern flickering in her gaze. I wish I could understand what you're feeling. Naruto trailed behind the others, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, but his mind far from the path they were walking. He had accomplished what he set out to do. The mission was over, and they had won. But instead of feeling victorious, all he could feel was a strange, hollow ache. The events of the past few days had left him more confused than ever, and the revelation about the Nine Tails had only added to the turmoil swirling in his mind. What am I supposed to do now? He thought, the question echoing in his head, over and over. He had always thought that strength was the answer, that if he could just be strong enough, everything would make sense. But now, as he grappled with the knowledge of what lay inside him, the lies he had been told, and the confusion of his own feelings, he felt more lost than ever. The Hokage's lie, Asuma's revelations, the power he had felt surging through him. None of it made sense. And yet, there was one thing that lingered, a feeling he couldn't shake. During the fight, when that power had taken over, he had felt something strange, something dark and intoxicating. It was as if, for a moment, he had been invincible, unbound by fear or doubt. And now, even though the power had faded, he could still feel it, lurking beneath the surface, waiting. Is this what it means to be strong? He wondered, a chill running down his spine. Or is it something else? The team continued their walk, the evening sun casting long shadows across the path. Despite the quiet, there was a sense of resolution among them, a feeling that they had grown stronger together, even if not all of them realized it yet. The land of waves was behind them, but the journey, both physical and personal, was far from over. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. See you in the next one.